thanks for coming. We've got a couple of forward-looking statement type slides here. I'm not sure why we need two, but apparently the lawyers said we need two, so that's welcome to it being listed in the United States. We are about polymetallic mix of metals, copper, lead, zinc, gold, and silver, and then most recently we've added a cobalt resource to our inventory. I'll walk you through that. We're in Alaska, safe mining jurisdiction. As Tom mentioned, this district was well known back in the 70s when Tom and I are a little younger looking, and it's went into about a 25-year hiatus period where there's very little exploration, very little work done in this district until about 2004 when we got back involved. And we've been working at it slowly and steadily over the last 10 plus years. And I think we're ready to sort of come out of our shell here. We're focused on two projects. Arctic is at a pre-feasibility level of study. We published that about 2 months ago. I think it's one of the best open pit copper projects in the world at 5% copper equivalent. I'll walk you through the details of that. Meanwhile, about 20 miles away, we have the Bor Knight Project. It's an exploration stage project, so we're still exploring it and seeing how big it is. It's substantially larger than Arctic, albeit at slightly lower grades. You can see the feasibility numbers there for the resource at Arctic, 43 million tons of 2.3 copper, 3.2 zinc, some lead and precious metals, in an open pit mining scenario. It's an absolutely spectacular ore body. At a 10,000 ton a day operation, you'll be producing about 80,000 metric tons of copper, 100,000 metric tons of zinc, plus the precious metals. So I'll walk you through those details. But the line-grabbing number should be that post-tax NPV of 1.4 billion, a 33% IRR. That's a hell of a project. So we'll walk you through the details here. We're in northwestern Alaska. This area is well known to mining. It's hosts the Red Dog mine, which has been in operation since the late 80s, or I think that this year they celebrate their 30th anniversary. So you've had at least a couple of generations of local workforce there. It's about 50 to 60% of the local workforce is Inupiat Eskimo, and that is basically run through the Nano Regional Corporation, a local Alaska Native corporation, and I'll talk to you about the partnership that we have with them a little later. But this region depends on mining. It's the tax base for the region. It pays for the schools and pays for the facilities, the health facilities in the region. So here's the Ambler Mining District. There's two portions of the district. Geologically, there's a belt of volcanogenic massive sulfide, polymetallic, copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver deposits. It extends for about 100 kilometers. We control about 70 kilometers of that belt, and there's some 30-odd known massive sulfides in it. Arctic is the most advanced, and then about 20 miles away is the Bor Knight portion of the district, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Here's Arctic. Sits on the side of a mountain. About 100 meters underneath the surface. There's 5 layers of massive sulfide over about 100-meter overall thickness. The individual massive sulfides are anywhere from a meter up to 30 meters thick, averaging between 8 and 10 meters. This is a very solid ore body. You see the grades again there, roughly a 5% copper equivalent, and again, an open pit mining scenario. I don't think there's anything else like it. The pre-feasibility study results, 12-year mine life, 10,000 ton a day operation. You're producing 160 million pounds of copper a year, 200 million pounds of zinc, 30 million pounds of lead, and then the 30,000 ounces of gold and 3 million ounces of silver. So this is a solid producer. You see the long-term metal prices there we've used, I think, are reasonable and probably on a conservative end. I think the BMO reports referring to a $3.25 long-term copper price to help fill that supply gap. Capital costs, Colin mentioned it, people aren't building multi-billion-dollar copper projects these days. This is not a multi-billion-dollar copper project. Modest capital investment of $780 million, plus your sustaining capital of 65 and your closure costs of 65 brings the total capital investment at about just over 900 million. So it's a mid-sized project, but you're kind of punching above your weight class in terms of the amount of metal that you're producing. Your mining costs, total operating costs are $46, $47 a ton. Very reasonable. Again, the massive sulfide high-grade nature of that makes the mining costs relatively modest, or your overall processing costs relatively modest. $1.4 billion post-tax NPV, 2-year payback, 33% IRR. This is, again, a solid project. Also, again, low on the capital intensity side. Typical projects are more in the $15,000 to $20,000 per ton of annual copper production. We're down at just over 6,200. So I'll just jump over and talk about Bor Knight, but again, Arctic it's this whole belt of VMS deposits. There's 30 some odd known deposits. If we added up the historic resources, they'd measure in the 40 to 50 million ton range. That's kind of low-hanging fruit for an exploration geologist to go spend $5–10 million and increase that mine life from the current 12 years to 20–30 years. That's not going to be a difficult challenge for any exploration geologist worth his salt. So that's Arctic. Across the way there, across the valley, about 20 miles away, is the Bor Knight Project. Same age rocks, but different geology. These are carbonate replacement style deposits, so more similar to the kind of things you find in the DRC and the Congo, but we're not in the DRC, we're in Alaska. I think that's another thing to sort of emphasize. The safe jurisdictional aspect of mining these days is becoming more and more to the forefront when you've got nationalization taking place in Indonesia and increasing taxes and royalties in the Congo. When you don't do this, don't take your asset before you've invested your billions of dollars. They usually monkey with you after you've invested the billions of dollars. So safe jurisdiction is a good place to be. So here's Bor Knight. We've been working there since 2011, working with our partner Nana, who own the land here. We've outlined an open pit resource. It's about 40 million tons of indicated resource at just about 1%, and a further 80 million tons of inferred in an open pit mining scenario. So that's roughly 125 million tons. The ore body continues at depth, underground potential resource, and about 58 million tons of 2.9%. Obviously, we used a higher cutoff grade there for that resource estimate, 0.5% for the open pit and 1.5% for the underground. So these are real resources. It's wide open. Last year, we spent $10 million of our big company partner, South32, which I'll explain about in just a minute. We spent their $10 million continuing to explore the down dip extension. All the holes hit. This is a grade times thickness map, so think of it as sort of a mineral intensity map for copper. The circled area here is where the existing resource is, the 125 million tons of open pit and the 58 million tons of underground. And then the outside area is what we drilled last year. All the holes hit mineralization. The best holes are closest in and around that northwest structural orientation. We'll be infill drilling that this summer with the 10 or 12 holes that we'll be drilling right now. We've got 3 rigs working on the project site, so a lot of activity going. I mentioned cobalt. We have a low level of cobalt associated with copper ore, which is somewhat common for some of these carbonate-hosted systems. We've done a lot of met work and geometallurgical work, and we understand where the cobalt resides. It's associated with the pyrite, so cobaltiferous pyrite. That's a good thing because we're going to spend most of our dollars mining copper and producing a copper concentrate, and the pyrite goes to the tail. So basically we've paid to mine it, crush, grind, and float it with our copper circuit, and we end up with probably 80% of our cobalt in about 5% of our mass in a pyrite concentrate made from the copper tail. So we'll be doing more work on that. We've got a $250,000 MET program going on right now to understand the costs of producing cobalt, and we'll be reporting on that later this year when we update the overall copper and cobalt resource for Bor Knight after this year's drilling program. Now, this project is in the proverbial middle of nowhere. As Tom mentioned, we worked on this back in the late 70s, and Alaska went into a period of land claim settlement where you really didn't know who the landowner was going to be, so all the mining companies basically left. We picked this back up, and we've been working in a partnership arrangement with NANA, but also with the Alaska State government through an organization called the Alaska Industrial Development Export Authority. It's essentially a state-owned development bank. They build infrastructure. In fact, they built the infrastructure to support the development of the Red Dog mine, which again has now been in operation for 30 years. They built the road and the port in the late 80s with an investment of $260 million. Same model as what AID is using to permit, and then eventually build the Ambler Access Road, which is a 200-mile road connecting the Ambler Mining District there, the Copper Star, to the Dalton Highway out to the east there. Dalton Highway is a state highway that runs up to the oil fields in northern Alaska. It's a state-maintained highway, runs down to Fairbanks. What we envision is producing our copper, zinc, and lead concentrates, trucking them down to Fairbanks, and putting them on the rail in Anchorage. Anchorage is a year-round port. It's a big advantage. It's about an 800-mile journey, so it's a bit of a distance. We think that's going to cost about $150 a ton, but the concentrates are worth $2,000 to $3,000 a ton. So pretty reasonable transportation costs for the value add there in the concentrates. So here's where this road project is in terms of permitting, and this is a really important step because obviously 43 million tons of 5% copper equivalent sitting on the surface would have been mined long ago if there'd been a road here. And we've been working diligently to get this thing off the ground and get the permitting going. It's underway, and I have to say, once the Trump administration got its people in place, we started to see the wheels start turning faster and faster. And I can't emphasize enough how important this aspect of the project is, because obviously 43 million tons of 5% sitting on a mountainside with no road is not worth a whole lot. But we've gone through two major steps of what's called the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process. That's the notice of intent. The scoping has been completed, which is putting it out for public comment to hear what the concerns are. And I don't like mining is not a concern. These have to be legitimate concerns that then have to be addressed in the draft EIS document, which is now being prepared. The draft will be completed at the end of this year and then put out for public comment in Q1 of next year with the record of decision, which is the final issuance of the EIS document, and record of decision by the end of 2019. So this is happening. The Trump administration, it's a priority for the Trump administration. We have the good fortune of the Assistant Secretary of Interior, Joe Bailash, being an Alaskan. I've known him for 30 years. He was former Commissioner of Natural Resources twice under two different governors, and he's kicking butt in Washington. He's getting things done. So this is a really important step here. Obviously, we'll start permitting the Arctic project as a next step. We're gathering the information this year on the tailings and waste facility. That's effectively taking that to a feasibility level study, and that will go into our documentation to put our EIS document and permit application together at the first half of next year. So that actually dovetails with the road very well. We expect that permitting process to take 2 to 3 years, and then a 3-year construction timeline. So we should fit very well into Colin's time frame for when China needs copper. I mentioned NANA, another very important piece of this puzzle, having a business arrangement with NANA as a landowner. Permitting a mine on private land is a lot easier than permitting a mine on government land, federal government land at least. And so they've been a wonderful partner. It's a typical royalty arrangement with NANA, and the important thing for them is jobs and business opportunities, and we've done well with them by that over our last 10-year working relationship. I'll wrap up here. South 32, our large company business partner, 3-year option. We're in the second year, $10 million a year. We're spending that, continuing to expand the exploration potential at Bor Knight, and we'll be wrapping that up this year with a resource estimate and a PEA to come out probably early next year. At the end of 3 years, they have a decision to make to exercise an option by contributing $150 million which is enough money to get both projects well through feasibility and permitting. So I think we're sitting in a good spot. We've got a lot of activity going on this year, a lot of news flow, and I'll rush through the last couple of slides here. We've got very good shareholders who've followed this story and supported this story since the beginning, and they're in it for the long term. What we really see is a value add here. I think the only things that are kind of comparable to us in terms of quality are things like Arizona Mining, which just got taken out by South 32, our business partner. And I think if you look at the metrics, we compare very well to them. We're copper, they were zinc, but a very similar story. We're here all day, so if you have a chance, stop by our booth or just grab Pat and I. Pat Donnelly's over here. We'd love to answer any questions for you. Thanks so much.